The Senate has initiated legislative moves to amend the 1999 Constitution to increase the federal government's share of revenue from the Federation account, arguing that the current revenue allocation formula, where the federal government receives about 52.68%, states get 26.72%, and local governments receive 20.60%, is outdated and no longer sufficient to meet national responsibilities amid rising infrastructure and security demands. Well, that's the conversation. And Segun, Sopitan, principal partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting, joins me for more on this. Good morning, and thank you for joining me today.
Good morning, Petra. Good to see you. Happy New Year.
You too. All right, now the Senate has revealed plans to review the federal government's share of allocation upward from 52.68%. What are your thoughts about that?
I find that quite strange. And I say that because I think that the consensus generally across board over time has been that the current revenue sharing formula, has not really worked for Nigeria, and that the concentration of resources at the center does not fit the reality of the existence of the country in terms of geographical size, in terms of population, in terms of even, the structure of our constitution and the powers that the constitution gives to the different, tiers of government. There is a clear mismatch between that and the revenue sharing formula. And one would have thought that we'll be moving in the exact opposite direction of what the senators are now trying to do. So I find this very strange, and I don't, to be honest, I don't understand the thinking behind it.
Well, maybe I should help you with the thinking. I'm sure you've heard about it anyway. I'll highlight it nonetheless. I mean, they're talking about the need for the federal government to meet its growing and changing responsibilities. Maybe you should speak to us about what these responsibilities could be.
Look, what's the job of the federal government? They are responsible for security, for the shared security of the country, especially from external aggression. They're responsible for border control, border management. They're responsible for identity management. They're responsible for managing infrastructure, at the federal level, which obviously exists across the country. They have some responsibility with regards to education at the tertiary level and at the secondary level to a certain degree as well. They have some responsibility in the health sector. They have very strong and heavy defense obligations. But the moment you move away from those things, you then begin to see the places where the states and the local governments have very significant responsibilities as well. So the question is that the current revenue allocation formula that the Senate is saying, is no longer providing enough revenue for the government, for the federal government to perform its duties. You have to ask whether the solution to that is to increase the share of the allocation, or perhaps to bake a bigger cake, perhaps to bring in more revenues into the coffers so that the 52% that the federal government is getting at the moment will be a much larger quantum of funding. And I think that the federal government has consistently moved in that direction since, the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has come on board. We've looked at increasing revenues from two sides, increasing the inflow side and reducing the outflow side. Reducing the outflow side was achieved by removal of subsidies on petroleum products and by, reducing the subsidies, indirect subsidies in forex allocation. That has been done. The economy is stabilizing after that shock, and we're seeing growth in revenues in that regard, and then we have the very controversial tax reforms that have come, on board at the beginning of this year, and that, if implemented properly, will result in significant bumps in the revenue, overall revenue, federal monies that are coming into the federation account. So we are baking a bigger cake already. Why do we now need to, increase the share of the federal government of that cake when actually, by constitution and by obligation, the other tiers of government also have very significant obligations. So at the state level, they're responsible for education, they're responsible for security to a certain degree, they're responsible for agriculture, they're responsible for infrastructure, both at the housing, health, road and transportation infrastructure as well. So there are responsibilities. In fact, the question is the 26% that goes to the state government, is that really adequate to cover the obligations of the state government as we speak at the moment? And I think the answer is a clear and obvious no. So this conversation, I think, is being approached from rather, with all due respect to, the senator that has raised this, I think the thinking has to be more deliberate and more rigorous than what we're seeing.
I like what you said, talking about the fact that we probably should bake a bigger cake rather than, tamper with the sharing formula. So talking about baking a bigger cake, you're talking about, increasing revenue generation. Talk to us about that. I mean, you've also mentioned that the government is moving in that direction, looking at some of the things it has done, whether it's subsidy removal or it is the introduction of the tax reforms. But what more do you think should be done to increase revenue, across board, so that we can also have enough money moved to the state and the local government? Because at the end of the day, the local government has, primary health centers, and you want to ask yourself, how many of these primary health centers are operational? I mean, with the exception of Lagos. When you go to some of those, these things are not operational. And then you also want to look at some of the schools, the primary schools, that are controlled by either states or especially the local governments. Is there, what can you say about these things?
I think, first of all, in terms of what more can be done to increase the size of the cake, it depends on how you want to look at the nature of the cake. And this is the conversation. It's a political conversation, unfortunately. It's the fact that the structure of our politics and the structure of our governance and the structure of our federation has to be looked into. What we are doing at the moment is keeping resources locked up and untapped, because the people that you are giving responsibility to manage the resources do not own the resources. And as a result of that, the ability to tap into those resources is significantly hampered. For example, in the area of tourism, look, Nigeria is an incredibly beautiful country. I've traveled. I think I've been to at least 34 of the 36 states and the FCT. It's just 2 states that I've not visited, in the course of my work and my life. And I can tell you that this country is beautiful, that we have a lot of resources locked up across the country in terms of tourism potential. If you know, this Kajuru local government that has become a hotbed for insecurity that nobody can go to, has one of the most incredibly beautiful castles that I've seen, outside of Europe. It's a resort, but we can't go there anymore, obviously, because of security. But there are so many places like that across the country. And, one would expect that the Senate and the federal government will be looking at mechanisms to help incentivize the state to unlock these resources. And I just mentioned tourism as only one example. You can look at the mining sector, you can look at, the creative sector, whether it's in music, whether it's in art, whether it's in movies, and all of that. What can we do to help the state show more interest in developing this dormant resources and dormant assets? At the moment, having this arrangement where the federal government collects all revenues, and then the state and the local government chairman go to Abuja, cap in hand every month to go and collect their share of that money, is actually a problem. We've got to find a way to reverse that model so that we can unlock the tremendous resources that we have at our disposal as a country, but that the state governments and the local governments, are simply not interested in, because they get enough money from Abuja at the end of each month to take care of themselves. So those are the conversations that we need to have, rather than talking about increasing the share of the federal government revenue. So if you look, then once you do that, the accountability and transparency obligations from citizen point of view towards the state and the local government will naturally bump up, because you will then see that the states and local governments are generating more revenues from the resources that belong to the people at the local level, and there will be no choice but to demand accountability from those people. So this idea by this senator is moving us in the exact direct opposite direction that we should be moving in.
All right, thank you so much. When we talk about, state governors going cap in hand to get money every month, there are those who will tell you that this is federally collected for the federation, that the money belongs to all of them actually, and they're just sharing their monies. Let me get your thoughts on that while we close.
Absolutely, and it's a problem. So, with the exception of Lagos State is the only state in Nigeria at the moment that has more revenues generated from within its own territory than the monies that it is collecting from the federation account. Every other state, their IGR is less than their FAC allocation, and that is the problem. So, we have to find a way to reverse that, to go along with what. And by the way, what's happening in Lagos is scratching the surface. If you really look at the IGR generating capacity of Lagos State, we're nowhere near what we should be doing. So it's not to say that Lagos should sit back and say, oh, I've done well and pat itself on the back. It's that it's leading by example in the direction we should be going in. And other states have got to be pushed in that direction as well too. Even with the incapacitation of the current federal structure in the Constitution, the states can do way more to increase the monies that they're generating within their territories rather than going to Abuja every month to collect their FAC allocations, which they then spend. And at the end of the month, they're basically like salary earners. As states, these states are just simply collecting salaries at the end of each month. And it's not good enough.
All right, thank you so much, Segun Sopitan, principal partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting, for your thoughts on the show today.
It was my pleasure. Have a good day.